Federal government is imposing a strict cap on international students. Ottawa says the new target for 2025 and 2026 will be 437,000 permits. That's down from 485 this year. Joining us now is Federal Immigration, Refugee and Citizenship Minister Mark Miller. Good morning to you, and thank you so much for joining us.
Morning to you. Glad to be on.
Give us an understanding of why this cap on the number of international students is necessary.
Well, this is an area that's been largely covered over the last year. If you recall, the federal government imposed a cap on international student visas that it would accord in January, and we've been following and monitoring the progress of that over the last little while in a market that's gotten overheated notably in British Columbia and in Ontario, but across Canada, and it's something we had to rein in. So this is the latest step in a number of measures. One, to sort of rein in the volume, but also look at a system that has focused more on quantity than quality. So there's a number of measures that are coming with this, including language requirements for postgraduate work permits, tying those postgraduate work permits to actual areas of the economy that are in need of labor, and sort of a rationalization that's been long needed. In January, I announced some steps to make sure that we were reducing the number of temporary residents globally in Canada, that students and postgraduate work permit holders hold about 50% of that sort of pie chart. We needed to do more, and this is the latest step. I think it makes sense. It's an issue of fairness. It's about the quality of the students coming into the country. It's about making sure that the institutions that charge them sometimes an arm and a leg welcome them in the right way so that they get the best education that they've been promised and have sort of a pathway to making sure that their experience in Canada is one that they hope for in the first place. So I think these are good measures. They are part of an ongoing series of changes we're making to make sure that this international visa system makes sense from a federal perspective, but there's a lot of responsibility that falls on the shoulders of provincial governments, and we're working with them as well, including the government of British Columbia, to make sure that this is really something that is good for students.
I wanted to get some more details on that, because we've seen a lot of issues here in BC with regards to international students, from exploitation to just the sheer number of international students here in BC. And I understand that you've said that the cap space will be based province by province, based on population and other factors. So what does this mean for British Columbia?
Yeah, and it's important to take a step back and not blame these kids. I call them kids because they are a younger cohort of the population for absolutely every ill that we're seeing in Canada. The volume of international students is one that has gotten out of control. A lot of designated learning institutions that are regulated by the provinces saw that opportunity to shore up their balance sheets and did it without necessarily thinking about some of the long-term pain that followed a lot of short-term gain. So I don't want to paint everyone with the same brushstroke. But what it does mean for British Columbia is that working with our provincial counterparts, which we've been actually had a very good collaborative relationship over the last few months, to make sure that this system is one for the students that people are looking for in this country and in the volumes that are sustainable. It is no surprise to anyone that volume of people coming into the country can impact affordability, but that isn't the only thing. So, federal government doing its part, but also making sure that we're working with provinces and the institutions themselves that are attracting these people to make sure that they have the proper environment to live in.
Is there a specific cap then for the number of international students that will be allowed to come into BC?
Absolutely. I could dig up those numbers for you, but generally what I did in January is to apportion the number of visa holders or visas that the federal government issues by essentially the population of a particular province. It meant that British Columbia and Ontario had to ratchet down their numbers significantly. We're doing that by another 10%. So you can work the math out on your head, but those are numbers that are public, and they will be trim back another 10%. Now, some institutions aren't hitting their numbers because their recruiting practices need to change. That's another discussion that we need to have. But in terms of the numbers that the federal government will issue, they'll be down by 10% for the next 2 years.
Yeah, and we know that some of the requirements that students will have to meet if they want to get a visa to study here in Canada will be changing in terms of the amount of money that's in their bank account. That was $10,000. It's now going up to more than $20,000. And I mentioned this earlier, but exploitation in BC has been a big problem with bad actors taking advantage of these students who want to make a life for themselves here in British Columbia. So what steps is the federal government taking to make sure that this type of exploitation doesn't continue?
Yeah, and it's important to highlight the point that you made. Last year in December, I increased the financial requirements for kids coming here and essentially doubled it. It aligns us internationally with the countries that we compete for these talents. It's no surprise to anyone in British Columbia that it's expensive to live in Canada. In some cases, when you talk about fraudulent actors, which are a small portion of this, not the vast majority, but they are selling some of these kids abroad a bill of goods, and that's not right. There's only so far that these measures will go. It is up to provinces, designated learning institutions, the federal government to continue to crack down on bad actors. Another measure that I implemented was a letter of verification process, which would deal with the worst cases of the fraud, which were kids showing up in institutions with letters of acceptance that were fraudulent. So we've reined that in. I think that has been important in making sure we're getting rid of some of the worst aspects of the fraud. But the stuff that goes on internationally and the use that designated learning institutions use of third-party agents in other countries, and some of those are a little dubious in nature, will have to change, and we'll have to make sure that those practices are changing as well.
All right, that is Federal Immigration Minister Mark Miller joining us today. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you. Have a great rest of the day.